uremic syndrome, the diagnosis for hemolytic uremic syndrome, symptoms, treatment, and prevention. And that will go into the idea of food safety. I will talk about E. coli in the world today, some statistics, a case called Stephanie Smith, the dangers of ground beef, and the challenges in prevention of E. coli infection. Then I'll go into my bibliography, acknowledgements, and then I'll open the floor to questions, comments, and constructive criticism. So background. What is food poisoning? Food poisoning is the contamination of the body from the consumption of any contaminated food or drink. That could include stagnant water, food that's been contaminated by any of the microbes, including bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. One of the bacteria that can affect and contaminate your food is Escherichia coli, which is the name for a family of bacteria. Some strains of the bacteria are normal flora, which means they normally inhabit the body and they live inside your gut. And then there are many dangerous strains. E. coli is regularly used by scientists for research. It's easy to grow in a lab, and it's a contamination indicator, which means that if you look at water and you test it for contamination, if you find E. coli, that usually leads to the idea of it being contaminated fecally, which means with feces. So dangerous strains of E. coli. They produce toxins called virotoxins, and they can also be called Shiga-like toxins because they are similar to the toxins produced by the Shiga bacteria, and they can lead to hemolytic uremic syndrome. In the media, they are referred to as STEC, which stands for Shiga-like toxin producing E. coli, EHEC, enterohemorrhagic E. coli, HUSEC, which is hemolytic uremic syndrome E. coli, and VTEC, which is virotoxin producing E. coli. So a virotoxin is a toxin that binds to cell surfaces, and it binds specifically to blood cells like veins. It's not effective when binding to larger blood cells like arteries, and they inhibit protein synthesis, which doesn't allow cells to produce proteins that it needs to live. Right here, there's a picture of a virotoxin. The red part is called the subunit A, and the blue part is called subunit B. One specific target for virotoxins are glomerulus, which is a filtering system in the kidney, and once that has been affected, it can cause kidney failure, and kidney failure is one of the symptoms of hemolytic uremic syndrome. So according to Mayo Clinic, hemolytic uremic syndrome is a condition that results from the abnormal premature destruction of red blood cells. Once this process begins, the damaged red blood cells start to clog the filtering system in the kidneys, which may eventually cause the life-threatening kidney failure associated with hemolytic uremic syndrome. And what this means is it can be caused by many things, but for this presentation, I'm talking about it being caused by E. coli, and that's due to the virotoxins infecting the blood vessels. So to diagnose hemolytic uremic syndrome, doctors can take a blood test, and they test for low platelet counts because the infection kills off the red blood cells and platelets in the blood. They can take a urine test for the presence of blood, and then they'll take a blood test from the blood found in the urine, and they can take a stool sample. And in the stool sample, they look for fecal contamination by bacteria, specifically E. coli. And again, that goes with the idea of E. coli being an indicator for contamination. So some symptoms of hemolytic uremic syndrome are bloody diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal pain, pale skin tone, fatigue and irritability, fever. It's usually not high and may not be present at all, so that can be one of the symptoms that is not present. Blood in the urine, small unexplained bruises or bleeding from the nose and mouth, decreased urination or blood in the urine, swelling of the face, hands, feet, or entire body, and confusion. There can also be nervous system symptoms such as seizures. So treatment of hemolytic uremic syndrome. They do fluid replacements because the kidney doesn't work. So what they'll do is, the whole point of the kidney is to filter out fluids that can no longer be used by the body and waste. It's part of the excretory system, but because of kidney failure, the kidneys can no longer do it. So doctors will do it for you. They do red blood cell transfusion because Some of the bacteria that lead to hemolytic uremic syndrome destroy red blood cells. They do a platelet transfusion for the same reason they do a red blood cell transfusion, because the virotoxins destroy the platelets. They do a plasma exchange for the same reason they do red blood cell and platelet transfusion. And then they might put you on kidney dialysis. And in most cases, you're on dialysis permanently. So you might come into the hospital 3 days out of the week or 5 days out of the week, and you'll be on dialysis for that time being. And that'll help filter out your kidneys because your body can't do it on its own. So treatment for an E. coli infection. When you have E. coli, do not use antibiotics. The antibiotics will succeed in killing the bacteria, but in fact, they'll make you more sick because the toxins stored in the bacteria will be released. Take plenty of fluids to combat the dehydration and fatigue that come with E. coli, and avoid antidiarrheal medications because this may also inhibit the process of removing the toxins. So prevention. Prevention of E. coli and hemolytic uremic syndrome from E. coli are linked to the prevention of food poisoning. And to prevent food poisoning, stay away from raw meat, unwashed fruits and vegetables, unpasteurized fluids, and stagnant water. One of the greatest factors for E. coli infection is ground beef, which I'll talk about later. And also watch out and pay attention to food recalls issued by the FDA. E. coli in the world today. So these are some charts linked to the cases of E. coli, and this one, it numbers the cases from 1982 to 2002, and in total there are 350 outbreaks, but 9,000 cases. And in this chart there is the median for each year, and then here it goes to the vehicles used to transmit E. coli. So the highest number, 42%, is linked to ground beef, and then other forms of beef take up 6%, so beef is very high, 48%. And then in this is fruit, E. coli infections from produce, so unwashed fruits and vegetables. And then I'll go into the Stephanie Smith case. So in the fall of 2007, Stephanie Smith and her mom ate burgers, and Stephanie Smith contracted E. coli from one of these burgers. The burgers were made by food giant Cargill, which in that year was the largest company in America. She suffered from bloody diarrhea, seizures, and was eventually put into a 9-week coma to ease the convulsions. When she woke up, she was paralyzed from the waist down, and she used to be a dance teacher, so that was very hard for her. And the burger had meat from Nebraska, Texas, Uruguay, and from South Dakota, there is a factory that processes fatty trimmings, and it treats them with ammonia to kill bacteria. So the dangers of ground beef. According to the New York Times, which is where I got my information on Stephanie Smith, ground beef is usually not simply a chunk of meat run through a grinder. Instead, records and interviews show a single portion of hamburger meat is often an amalgam of various grades of meat from different parts of cows and even from different slaughterhouses. These cuts of meat are particularly vulnerable to E. coli contamination, food experts and officials say. Despite this, there is no federal requirement for grinders to test their ingredients for the pathogens. So back here, the meat from Uruguay is the one considered to be the meat that had the E. coli. And what this says is that meat, specifically hamburger meat and ground beef, is usually not one slab of meat from a cow, but taken from different cows. And when it says grades of meat, there are USDA and the FDA say that you should only eat grade A meat. And the companies will say that their meat is grade A because some of the trimmings are from grade A meat, but most of them are from lower grades, which is where the E. coli infections tend to come from. Then there are the challenges and preventions on the count of companies. So Cargill did not thoroughly check the meat scraps for E. coli infections, and that's because they have an agreement with their supplier that they won't check, and that's to prevent, like if Cargill finds anything, then it might do a major recall, and that'll affect the industry, and the suppliers don't want that to happen. So the suppliers are expected to check for E. coli themselves, but there are no government regulations allowing that, that force that. There are about 12 strains of E. coli that are not allowed to be found in foods, and they have, you have to test for those, but after that you don't have to test anymore. And the tests that Cargill can do themselves are very limited because of their contract with their supplier. So this is to ensure, like I said, that the if something is found, major recalls across the industry don't happen because that could destroy the industry. And basically, companies are putting capital and wealth above consumer safety by not checking for E. coli infections. So this is my bibliography, my acknowledgements, and I'll now open the floor to questions, comments, and constructive criticism. Dialysis is when they put a tube into any part of your body. For this, it's kidney dialysis, and basically takes out any waste and it puts in fluids so that can circulate in your body, because the kidney can't do that themselves. The kidney usually it takes the waste and puts it out in the form of urine, but because you have kidney failure, you can't do that properly, so dialysis does it for you. Sure.
Is it only once, or do you have to go after the multiple times?
You go as long as you have the kidney failure. For most cases, kidney failure doesn't go away, but there are some. And you won't go every day. You'll go often though. So I know a friend who goes 3 days a week, and she basically stays in the hospital the entire time while they're doing dialysis, and then she comes home, but every week she goes back. Drew?
Is there some regions in the world more likely to get E. coli infections, like third world countries like India or Africa?
And third world countries, like you said, because of not lack of education about contamination in food and stagnant water, there tend to be high numbers. But also in America, because of how companies put capital and wealth ahead of consumer safety, they do not often check for E. coli, because if they do, their profits will go very low. So in America, there are about 36,000 cases every year, and 3,000 are hospitalized for that, and there are about 30 deaths. I didn't get any statistics for third world countries, but I can get back to you on that.
Great.
Kyle?
Does age affect the risk of infecting E. coli?
Well, age and time of the year affect the risk, because younger kids don't tend to eat the things that you can contract E. coli from, things that E. coli is most present. There was a study that 71% of E. coli cases are found during the summer, because that's the time when people are using hamburgers and hamburger patties the most.
What is stagnant water?
Stagnant water is contaminated water. So in this case, it's fecal contamination, which is contamination by feces.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lau?
Are there any sort of preventative measures that people are trying to work on to help combat this not checking meat for E. coli?
Well, there are studies being proven. Like there was this one study where they asked the question, why can you eat a steak blood rare but not a hamburger like that? And that's because with ground beef, E. coli usually lives on the surface of the meat. So with ground beef, you're mixing that in. So you have to cook it thoroughly, not like with this blood rare steak where you cook just the surface. And people are doing more to cook, so they're implementing higher standards for cooking, like proper cooking temperature and using heat thermometers to check for proper cooking in turkeys and any kind of meat. And then there are also, in America, children are often given education about not eating contaminated things, so washing your vegetables, washing your hands as well to prevent the spread of bacteria.
So is there any way that once you ingest E. coli, is there any way for you to like rid your body of it?
Right now there is no cure and there are very little treatments. In fact, there are no treatments because of how I said that antibiotics would kill the bacteria, but they will make you more sick. So right now there's no known way. Though scientists are looking into ways of killing the bacteria outside of the host. So there was an experiment recently done where we looked at how cinnamon inhibits E. coli growth.
How?
Cinnamon, so spices, inhibit E. coli growth. And another thing is that don't take in seasoned food because the spices, again, like the antibiotics, will kill the bacteria, but they'll release the toxins. Right.
If there are no known treatments, does the E. coli just work itself out through the system?
The body fights off the toxins, but it doesn't fight off the bacteria.